Well, here we are in Tbilisi, the capital of Georgia, for the 24th EBRD annual summit, the first time the summit's been held in the Caucasus region. I'm here with Ben Aris, who is, of course, the editor-in-chief of BNE IntelliNews. Ben, you haven't quite been to all 24 of these summits, but you've been to a fair few. What's your reading of the mood here?
I think it's been very lively. I mean, there's been a big delegation turnout. I remember going to the one in Kiev in 2007, and I thought that was going to be the last one, in so much as the region had been developing really fast. Those were the boom years. But certainly the EBRD is back in play. I mean, it's essential, and lots of people have come. I ran across the Ukrainian finance minister,
Natalie Jaroska,
who is busily trying to raise money from the West and build relationships. And for her, this is key, because the IFIs are here, not just the EBRD, but a lot of the other ones too. So there's a lot of marketing discussion for her to do. She was doing meetings from 8 o'clock in the morning.
And you've also just done a interview, of course, with the new economy minister of Ukraine.
Yes, and I was actually much encouraged, because they were off to a slow start, and they have an enormous agenda of things to do, but they're actually making differences. I mean, he appointed himself to the commission that is in charge of selling the oil, and basically killed a scam that the oligarchs have been running for the last 20 years of helping themselves to a 15% discount. And there was severe pushback, but they actually ended that for the first time in Ukraine's history. They sold oil, state-produced oil, at market prices. I mean, it's quite shocking, the scale of things. But you talk to the EBRD people, they're very encouraged. They're saying it's going in the right direction, but there's still that much more to do.
From my end, I spent part of this morning watching Sussuma Chakrabarti, the president of the EBRD, give his opening address. In the copy of BNE Monthly that you've got there, we did an interview with him before this summit. The opening address, it was pretty upbeat, but it did admit, well, two things. Firstly, in quite a few of the EBRD's member states, transition has actually stalled, but there are some standout reform successes, one of which, in Chakrabarti's words, is Georgia, which is one reason why the EBRD is here. Chakrabarti was at pains to point out that even though the EBRD's region has been really caught between two pretty major headwinds in recent years. Firstly, the Eurozone crisis to its west, and then to the east, Russia, the largest economy in the region, of course, has been going through financial dire straits as well. During this very, very difficult period between 2010 and 2014, according to Chakrabarti, the EBRD's lent no less than 34 billion euros, so they're really trying to crank up their operations. And he was at pains to point out in front of all the member states that in 2014, EBRD investment in Ukraine doubled from 500 million euros to 1.1 billion euros. The little sting in the tail, I thought, of Sussuma Chakrabarti's opening address, he also mentioned it in the interview with us before the summit, was he mentioned the AIIB, the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, which of course is a very hot topic in development circles, a China-led bank that America tried to discourage other G7 countries from joining, and then of course the Brits joined and the Germans joined and all the rest of it. Sussuma went out of his way to highlight the AIIB as one of our important partners and talked about the EBRD already forming strong relations with this fledgling organisation.
Well, the situation is very difficult, because the chief economist from the EBRD just released their updated outlook, and it's sort of cautious optimism, because they're saying on the one hand you've got the Ukraine-Russia conflict, which has introduced sort of massive instability into the region, and on top of that it's driven Russia's recession, which was happening anyway. It's made it much worse. And so you've got a spillover effect. Ukraine itself is suffering badly because of that. I mean, disastrously, as is Russia. But then that's affecting a lot of the other countries in the CIS. Remittances are down, migrant workers are staying at home, and that's causing problems in the Caucasus and in Central Asia. But on the other hand, he was saying the good news is that the quantitative easing that started in Europe at the beginning of this year is giving a boost to countries in the Balkans and in Central Europe. And so on balance there's going to be a stagnation across the region, but there are very stark differences within the region.
Just briefly before we move on, because I know you've been to some other sessions, the EBRD's estimate of 0.8 minus 4.5% growth in Russia this year. Do you buy it, or do you think it'll be stronger?
No, I think it's overdone. EBRD is traditionally quite down on Russia. I mean, I think we're looking at something like 3%. I mean, Russia's surprised.
Minus 3%.
Minus 3. I mean, it's going to be a
negative number.
Yeah, definitely. But the economy has bounced back much faster. The inflation's from the devaluations worked through the system much faster than anyone was expecting. And we're seeing real import substitution going on. I mean, there's this great new cheese factory called Cosa Nostra. Cosa meaning goats, and it produces goat cheese. And they've seen
our goat's cheese,
exactly,
as opposed to West European goat's cheese.
And they've seen their orders quadruple, and they're like desperately buying in the machinery. And so, this is actually a permanent change because the cheap ruble makes the Russian economy competitive for the first time.
Now, briefly, I know you went to some sessions today on Macedonia.
Yeah, I mean, of course, that one's interesting because at the weekend we had a terrorist attack. 22 people were killed, ethnic Albanians and 8 policemen. And it highlights, the lingering legacy of ethnic tensions and the collapse of Yugoslavia in that case. And at the same time, you had the head of the special economic zones giving a presentation. And the investment story there is fantastic. I mean, they have the lowest effective tax rate in the world of around 7%, said the IMF. And very, very low flat taxes, and they've got a number of international investors to come in, one of which, an American company that makes catalytic converters, passed $1 billion of export. First time Macedonia has ever had $1 billion revenue export from a single country. So that's upbeat, and it highlights, the problems that everybody's still facing, but the progress is underneath there as well.
The other main session I went to, I learnt today that the second biggest use of PPPs, public-private partnerships, the second biggest user in Europe is actually Turkey, after the UK.
But you're not actually keen on the PPP method, are
you? What we got from the session today, while the EBRD is very upbeat about PPPs, they're also mindful that certainly in the UK, a lot of the PPPs has been seen as lacking in transparency and certainly lacking in value for money for taxpayers. But there's an enormous infrastructure boom going on in Turkey under Erdogan, as you know. They're building the world's biggest airport, multiple crossings across the Bosphorus. And Olivier Deschamps, the head of operations, the managing director of operations of the EBRD, said that PPP will remain a major force going forward in the development of Turkish infrastructure. Well, that's all we've got time for today. We'll be back tomorrow here in Tbilisi from the BNE's IntelliNews' stand in the networking area. Thank you for listening.